basically the session is being recorded. This is March 6th, and we apologize for missing, I think we missed, did we miss January and February, or was it December? Whatever, we apologize because we, like Dee Dee had said previously, we have an IDEA review and we have a lot of indicator things that came up and a couple different cohorts that we're in, and I know you all understand because it's crazy in districts. We just couldn't do it. So anyhow, we'll go ahead and get started. Dee Dee, if you want to go to the next slide. Okay, so today's topics are dual roles during ETR meeting, services if withdrawn due to absenteeism, school counseling as a related service, amount of time for SDI, and change of placement. I will say that we're going off of some things that were maybe a little surprise to us in this IDA review, or maybe a little bit of conflict that we were trying to resolve and may still be trying to resolve, and just calls that we have had. Some of these may seem redundant to some of you, but sometimes we have some new directors, and sometimes we get calls from teachers and whatnot. And so we're kind of going with things that we've had maybe the most calls about or emails about. And we definitely will open it up to questions too.
Perfect. Thanks, Helen. So the first question that we wanted to address, and we've gotten this a couple of times here recently, is asking about whether or not an individual can serve two roles for an initial or even for a reevaluation ETR meeting. And the answer is yes, it depends on what those roles are. So if it is not a role that is specifically identified as being individual in CF9, so that is having the required members in the record review indicators, it specifies who has to be involved. So if it isn't called out as a singular individual role, then it's okay for the person to share roles. So for example, a teacher cannot serve as both a gen ed teacher and an intervention specialist. That is a no-no. You can't do that. That's sort of what we call double dipping. However, it is absolutely acceptable for a school psych to also serve as the district representative. In fact, it is a very common practice for districts to assign a school psych that role, and they may even sit in as the district rep for an IEP meeting. District representatives, you just have to remember what the scope of that role is and some of the responsibilities that are assigned to that role. And as long as everyone is aware of that and the district has authorized that individual to act in that capacity, then that's fine. One of the main things to remember for a district rep is that they are given the authority to allocate resources, on behalf of the district. And what we typically say is, if you're a school psych or you're a SPED director and you're acting, in that capacity, or a building principal, there may be situations that come up that are very tricky, where you're talking about a lot of resources that may be required in terms of placement decisions or things of that nature. And it's always acceptable to say, I'll have to take this higher up to, the superintendent or whatever, and reconvene if the person doesn't feel comfortable or doesn't have the authority to make a certain decision. That's always acceptable to do at a meeting. So the short answer again is yes, someone can serve in two roles as long as they're not roles that are specifically called out to be separated.
Sorry about that. I just read something that said, don't tell me people forget to unmute after all this time, and I just did. So I kind of want to clarify this. I know it's true for community schools. I need to know if it's true for districts. If a student is withdrawn from a school due to the 72-hour rule, are they obligated to continue services outlined in the student? Are they obligated to provide FAPE? So anybody on this call that is a district, do you have the 72-hour rule? And I hate to be sound ignorant where in that situation. I know it for the community schools because I just had to write things with them for dropout. I know that figures into their dropout. So anybody? Okay. If nobody really has an answer, what I'm going to just say that students are, if a student is withdrawn from a district, community school, whatever, they do not have, okay, Liz just put in, we do not have it follow a 72-hour rule. I think it's mostly community schools. Has some, I'm not, yeah, because it's a whole big deal when we get into doing graduation and finding students and dropout. But anyhow, if they do not, because of the 72-hour rule, are unenrolled, the LAA is not responsible for providing FAPE. And what we just were going to stress here, the importance of an absence intervention team, ensuring that schools have used evidence-based interventions to mitigate any absenteeism, as we don't want to withdraw students because of absences until we have exhausted all other avenues. And I will say, this is a big issue when it comes to dropout and graduation indicators 1 and 2, because I'm overwhelmed with them right now. And a lot of times too, it's trying to find that student somewhere else if they've been unenrolled. But I do believe this is only for community schools or charter schools. So
Thank
unless
you,
somebody
Helen.
has, huh?
Oh, I was just saying thank you. Yeah, thank you for clarifying that, Helen. But as a rule, the one thing I would say that is applicable to this question, which kind of seems like a no-brainer, but it's a fair question, is if a student who is eligible as a student with a disability withdraws from your school, you are no longer responsible in any way,
Right.
shape, or form for FAPE. It is the responsibility of whatever LEA they land in. If they don't land somewhere, and we know that that does happen, students, and they just may be MIA off the books for sometimes a year or two before they find their way back to a district. And what happens is when they land wherever they land, then it is the responsibility of that district or that community school to move forward with, obviously, usually you're going to have expired documents and you're, starting with an ETR, or at the very least a new IEP, because everything is expired. And that's all you do. You pick up the gauntlet and you sort of move forward when they do turn up. But when they withdraw, they withdraw. You are not responsible for FAPE in any way.
Thank you, Dee Dee. And I did have, just to kind of put in here, I did have a couple questions from a couple schools recently on dropouts for kids that are seniors, and do you have to do a summary of performance? And since we have the 72-hour rule, I'm just going to say, if a kid drops out or for some other reason, I don't know what that reason necessarily would be besides dropout, it's not mandatory to do a summary of performance, but if that kid's a senior, I would do a summary of performance, at least to the point of saying where the student is, maybe the reason for dropout, and giving that student some information about getting his GED and some places that they could get that. I just said that because that's just come up with 2 districts in the last couple of weeks. So anyhow, I just figured, well, 72-hour rule, let's go ahead and go with the SOP too. Sorry, Dee Dee, I just threw that in there.
Perfect. That's perfect, Helen. We like it when they get things for free.
Yeah. Okay, if a student meets a school counselor regularly, and this is used as a strategy to improve school functioning, should we put this in as a related service, as related service minutes? Definitely you can, and you'd put counseling / guidance. And then we have some ways that you would write that: individual coaching, counseling for self-regulation, self-advocacy, to include discussion of strategies, use of supports, modeling, role play, guided self-reflection, can be done in small groups for anger management, social skills development, etc. Also, I wanted to add, if this is a kid of transition age, and it's dependent upon whether you want it in there specifically for support for school personnel, for like you want it in a goal or something, this is actually a very good, much needed transition service activity. And you can do it throughout the IEP. You can put how many times. And this makes much more sense to put in a transition service activity. I'm not saying not put in for a goal or whatever, than some of the things, unfortunately, I've seen in transition service activities. Like I said, we're going through a review, and I also have a district with an indicator 13 finding, and I'm kind of surprised by a few things I see, and I understand to a point, especially finding time to meet with the kid to do some of the service activities or to infuse them in wherever they're at. But when I read needs similar to this, and then I see I'm going to write a resume, I get a little concerned. So that's just me on my soapbox again for transition. So any questions around this?
Thanks, Helen. That's a good point about certainly if a student is working on social emotional things, adaptive behavior skills, self-regulation, as Helen said, those are great things that can be addressed through transition service activities. But again, we want to make sure that we're making it clear here that if a student is meeting on a regular basis with a guidance counselor for some of that skill development, you absolutely should be capturing that under related services and capturing what those assigned minutes are, the frequency and the duration. And again, capturing, like we've given you just a snippet of an example of what that might look like. But certainly you would want to be capturing that under related services because you want to we like to say, give yourself credit for the things that you're doing. And if a student were to leave your district, you want to make sure that wherever the student goes, that it's clear that these are the things, the supports that are in place that the student needs.
Absolutely.
Okay, so if you have been on our office hours at all in the last 5 years, you have probably seen this question multiple times, but it always comes up, and it's a good question. We understand why everybody wants like a definitive answer, so we get this question at least a couple times every year of how teachers should determine the amount of minutes for specially designed instruction for each goal. And it's a legitimate question because everybody wants to know, is there a formula? Is there is there a table that we can refer to? And sadly, the answer is no, there's not. IDEA, does not outline for us how minutes are to be determined. It really is an IEP team decision. And so, one of the things we always say is, no, we can't tell you a formula or, there's not a table, like I said, and we certainly also don't want to see a practice of everybody gets the same in an effort to make things easier. That is a huge red flag. So as Helen mentioned, in other areas. The same is true in Section 7. If we were to start seeing that every student had the exact same number of SDI minutes for every single subject, that's a red flag, because that tells us that it is not individualized and it is not based on the student's needs. So we certainly do not want to give anyone the impression that that would be a good alternative to just sort of make a district-wide decision about what those minutes look like. It really is an individual, done on an individual basis, but it is a team decision. What we can tell you are what are the things that you should consider as a team when you're making the determination. And so we just popped a few things up here. This is not all inclusive by any means, but these are some of the things that you would want to look at. Look at sort of your data and your progress notes, and the information that you have about the student. You want to think about the student's learner profile. So how do they learn best? Is the student a strong visual learner, kinesthetic, auditory? Think about how long it typically takes the student to acquire skills, and then think about your knowledge of the student and how long it usually takes the student to acquire, and it can be any skill, it doesn't have to be academic, but the time between them being at an emergent level to a level of moderate accomplishment, or moderate proficiency versus getting to a mastery level. So you want to think about those kinds of things. Think about the complexity of the skill that you're working on, where their baseline is. Obviously, look at the baseline where they're at, and think about, do they have, we kind of call them adjoining skills or complementary skills that that they might possess, that you can leverage to help them acquire the skill that you're working on, to address that deficit that that you've addressed, that you've targeted in the student's goal. So when you look at all of that information, you really are just trying to come up with a reasonable amount of time that's going to support that goal. And the one thing I guess that Helen and I just want to add is the reminder that a student's IEP is, as we like to say in the biz, a living, breathing document, which means it's fluid. It can change at any time. It's not carved in stone. And so if you, if you enact and implement a student's IEP and you're providing the SDI and it's not sufficient, and the student is making negligible progress, it's always okay to increase the minutes for SDI if necessary, or go back and tweak the goal or tweak the accommodations or any of those things. And those are things that we often remind people when we talk about the importance of monitoring progress and making adjustments to the IEP as needed. And that's one of those areas that might need to be tweaked. So again, short answer, no, there's not a magic formula. Hopefully we're giving you a few things to think about looking at and considering when you're coming up with a number of minutes for SDI or related services.
Okay, Dee Dee, I guess you already answered that slide before. Okay. We have gotten some questions recently. What is considered a change of placement that requires a parent's signature? So truthfully, a change of placement that requires a signature is when a student is moving from a more inclusive setting to a more restricted setting. Like if they're going from gen ed classroom to a resource room, less time in gen ed, one-on-one, it's considered a change of placement. Moving to less restriction does not require a signature. So if you're moving, and this was actually the question, if you're moving the student out of the resource room into a gen ed placement, you're giving the student more access to the general ed, so you do not need a parent's signature to do that. I will say there are times with some parents, you may have a conversation, because there still are some parents out there that want their students in a more restricted placement due to various behaviors or parent concerns. But moving a student to a less restricted, more inclusive setting does not require a parent signature. Any questions there? Okay, Dee Dee, I think you're up for some of this.
Thank you, Helen. So that's really all of the questions that we had for this month. As Helen said, I mean, we have not that we didn't get other questions, but they're more nuanced and specific. So we kind of shared the ones that we've gotten more than one time, we've gotten frequently, and that are applicable to anyone joining us for office hours. So we kind of wanted to leave you with a few updates. As we have shared, we do have an IDEA review going on in our region at this time. And so what we wanted to do, we shared this with our internal monitoring teams last Friday on our day 3 of internal monitoring training, and we thought we would share this with office hours as well. These are just a few updates of things that may not be new, but we might say there's a greater emphasis on, or we're noticing that the OEC monitors are really tightening up on, and some things that they've not really called out before that maybe they were just a little bit more lenient about, and now they're being a little tougher. So we thought we would kind of share a few of those things first within the ETR, and then Helen will talk about things in transition, and then some of the things in the IEP. So in the ETR, one of the things that has been brought up during this review multiple times is in part 4 in the eligibility section, you cannot say the student continues to qualify for, SLD, or the student continues to qualify as a student with autism. And that may seem very strange. We had a lot of discussion around this because people were kind of put off and confused by that. Because we have the documentation that the student did previously qualify. So naturally, everyone's question is, well, why can't we say that? And the comment was made that it constitutes predetermination. And I did actually go back to the monitors and say, I don't understand how it is predetermination. And I've got a lot of school psychs coming back and questioning me about this. And they did share that directive came from dispute resolution. And so when something comes down as an edict, if you will, from dispute resolution, that usually indicates to us that there was a due process complaint or a complaint that was received at the state level from parents or a parent group. And so what we would say is, this is certainly not a hill to die on. Just don't say continues to qualify. Just say the student qualifies under the category of whatever it is, and just leave out the whole continue. It's just one word. Just don't say it. The next thing is that it, again, is not necessarily anything new, but just sort of being more thorough in the explanation. In part 4, everyone knows that you have to give the justification for how and why the student is found eligible for whatever category they are. When in the past, when you suspected more than one category on the planning form, you would just simply put a statement in part 4. You would simply just say the student did not qualify as a student with autism. However, the student met eligibility as a student with an intellectual disability, and you would give the justification for why they met that. However, instead of just a simple statement that no, they didn't meet the category of whatever, you have to explain how or why they did not meet the qualifications for that category and why they did meet the qualifications for the category that you landed on. So again, just to be clear, we're saying when you suspected more than one disability category at the onset, and you are giving the rationale in the eligibility of why they do qualify in the category that they landed in, you have to also just give a rationale, a justification of why they did not meet the criteria for the other category that you initially suspected. And then finally, this one is a big change. And what I can tell you is, again, this is something that we asked, why are we seeing this? We had not seen this before. And it was shared with us that this actually was from the US Department of Education and OSEP, that you are required to get informed consent for every evaluation, including reevals, even when there is no new testing being done. And so the operating practice has been in the past that you only get consent when new testing is being done or new information is being gathered. But if no new testing is being done, no new info is gathered, that you do not need to do that. And what we have learned from the monitors from this review is that no, in fact, we are expected to get consent for every eval, whether there is new info, new testing or not. Now, I know that automatically what happens is this brings up the question of what happens when you can't get consent. What are we supposed to do when we have a non-responsive parent? That has not changed. That is the same rule and the same process, and it has always been. And that is, you do your due diligence. You make sure that you have your documentation of attempts and that you use a variety of different methods to get that consent. And that if you have a non-response, you can move forward. And you've probably heard me say this before, but I'll say it again. You should always ask yourself, as the ETR team, the testing or the information that you're trying to obtain through new testing, is it really critical to being able to meaningfully inform an IEP and impact the evaluation process? Is it truly critical, or is it just information that would be nice to have? If it is truly critical, then absolutely go ahead and test. If it's not critical, it'd be kind of nice to have that, then we suggest that you do not do that if you can't get consent. However, again, I do want to make sure that I stress this. When I say that you can move forward without consent, that's not new. That's always been the case. But please remember the parameters that are around that. That is if you truly get no response. If you talk to a parent over the phone and they say, yes, I give consent, then you have to obtain their signature. And why? Because we all know the rule that there is no such thing as verbal consent when it comes to the ETR, excuse me. It's different than, doing an amendment to an IEP. You can do that verbally. You cannot get consent verbally for an ETR. And so if you get any kind of response from the parent, then you have to obtain their signature. If you don't get any response, then you're just going to use your documentation of attempts. And obviously, if you get a response and you keep trying to get that consent, you have to move forward. And again, you're kind of stuck until you can get that consent. So all of those things have not changed. Everything is the way it has always been around the issue of consent. What is just something that is new is requiring consent for every evaluation. So I'll pause in case questions.
Whoops, Dee Dee, I was just typing into Liz about Do we have like any documentation or spells out the directives from dispute resolution that the word continues to qualify? Right now, we don't have something specific. That's what we were told. Where it came from, we can clarify once again with the head of monitoring, because like I said, Dee Dee and I were very surprised. Nobody's going to call this out unless you're in a review, but like Dee Dee said, take out the continues. But yes,
Right. And what I would
somewhat.
say, oh, I'm sorry,
Go ahead.
Helen, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Dee Dee.
I was just going to say, there isn't anything that we're going to be able to get to show you because dispute resolution is not going to share a complaint that was filed because that would be a violation until it's released publicly. And as you all know, when you go to anything where attorneys are kind of presenting, they'll share recent case law. And at that point, they'll say from so-and-so school district because it's public record at that point. But until that time, no, they're not going to give us anything. If you're asking if they have put anything out in writing, no, they have not. And that might not happen because in all honesty, that's a pretty small thing in relation to, some of the other, I guess, more bigger issues, I guess I would say, is what I'm trying to say. So I don't know that we will see anything come down in official written guidance for quite some time, if at all. We're just making you aware that this is something that was called out as non-compliant on multiple records. And when we pushed back and asked why, that was the response that we got, that came directly from dispute resolution. So our best suggestion to everybody is just roll with it and don't say it anymore.
Okay. I had said earlier this year that last summer when we were at the transition capacity building, and we have NTAC there and et cetera, that some things were going to change on the transition page, not anything truly major, but we were told that was going to come out in the fall. Then we were told that was going to come out in the spring or February, let's put it that way. Then we just asked on our last meeting, and no, it's not coming out in the spring. And I was in legal. I don't even think we'll see it in the fall. However, what I will say, I did push back because I hadn't put it out as a definitive to everyone, combining post-secondary goals. In the past, in many reviews in a district made their own decision. We will not combine goals because truthfully, the post-secondary education, training, and employment goal were typically the one combined. And for the most part, people did not go the extra step. So districts made rules that we are no longer combining goals. Well, now, because of the number of the number not correct in monitoring, and a little bit with NTAC. I have to really check on NTAC because they had a lot of combination, but it was discussed at our symposium, whatever. So do not combine goals. If you've got them combined right now, you're not in a review, just know don't combine them next time you write an IEP for a transition kid. So post-secondary education and training, one goal. Post-secondary employment must align with whatever you write in the post-secondary education and training goal. And I did bring this up last year a few times in different situations. No longer, or at one time, I think people were saying the student would work a part-time job to pay for college. Well, no, it's got to be completely after the whatever they do in their post-secondary training or education. Like if a student went into on-the-job training in a retail situation, then his employment goal would be employed full-time or whatever in a retail store, whatever, same as college. earned a degree as a nurse, full-time employment as a nurse. Now, at one point, one of the monitors had said, you have to say after college. No, you don't. Sometimes does it make sense to say after college? Sure, but you don't have to say that. I went to the head of transition because I didn't agree, and that has never been said to us. So no, but independent goals. One other thing I will say in this review, now we had some conflicting, so people that are in this review right now know that there are some new monitors, and I'm not knocking monitors because we're being recorded, and not just because we're being recorded. They are a support. It's not out to get you, but I would say over the past few reviews we've been in, I didn't see as many things being called out. Sometimes I'd call them out because I thought it's not best practice. We go for best practice, just not compliance. But I will say they are definitely looking for the pins in AATA. If you really want to make sure you have them all, put preference, interest, needs, strengths. Be a little more in depth in some of them. And I hate to say this, but sometimes we see a needs, but you look in the profile or whatever, things that are easy to accomplish, like write a resume. And then we see this kid has a lot of behaviors or whatever, or other needs, self-advocacy, whatever. They are looking at that. Is this the only need? And absolutely, I know we have some very high functioning kids on IEPs, and when they're in high school, it's like, why is this kid still on an IEP? But high stakes testing and possible accommodations in college, parents don't want to sign that release. Some do. So I do understand why, you have a kid that drives, he already works part-time, passed all of his end of course, what am I making for a transition goal? I can help with that, or we can think of some things, but they are definitely looking at one time in a year. That's not going to get it, because how much can you really accomplish one time in a year if it's like a self-advocacy goal or I'm not thinking of any. If it's an assessment, sure, you're going to do an assessment maybe one time of the year, but you probably need another service activity in there. But I'm going to not go any more in depth. But the one thing I will say, I was really surprised that people were still using opportunities. That's been gone for at least 5-6 years. And I know I have put that out on a number of different occasions, because opportunity means in the service activity, you might do it, you might not do it. So, and all those service activities have to be instruction to the kid or instruction in whatever coach and assistance with. They are really looking at that. And to me, that's not just compliance, that's best practice. So I will get off of the transition right now and let Dee Dee go ahead with some of the rest that's on the page.
Thank you, Helen. Those are really good reminders and updates about how to make sure we're compliant in the transition section, because we know that's probably the hardest section of the IEP. So thanks for all of that. We did just want to share, and I know we did talk about this a little bit at the beginning of the year. We updated info in our Canvas course to address this, but we wanted to give even some more specifics about making sure that we get in the habit in Section 7 about quantifying and clarifying. And what we mean by that is we typically see in accommodations a lot of things that are listed, but they're left very open-ended. And what the OEC is saying is we have to have specifics. So everybody knows what we mean when we say that a student is going to have extended time, or the student is going to get frequent breaks. Well, how many breaks? How long are the breaks? And we've kind of talked about extended time and breaks before, but again, just really putting more specifics in for other things. So we've shared before, but it's good to reiterate, as part of the condition of the goal, when we say that a student is going to have a prompt or a cue, well, what kind of cue and how many? So when the student is given no more than 2 verbal prompts, or given 3 visual prompts, the student will blah, blah, blah. So we have to make sure that, because that way everyone who is supporting the student knows, well, how many prompts the student is supposed to receive and what type of prompts. The same thing is true when we start talking about accommodations. So how many breaks? How long are the breaks? This is one that we had not heard before, but it was brought up multiple times, that if breaks are occurring outside of the room and require adult monitoring, who is providing that? Not the person's name, but the role. So for example, sometimes we have students who, if they're easily overwhelmed, or particularly sometimes our students with some behavioral challenges or anxiety may need to leave the classroom, and they may leave the classroom for an extended period of time, like 10 or 15 minutes. And obviously, they're not just aimlessly wandering alone in the hallways. So if we are saying that the student takes a break outside of the classroom, then OEC is saying that we need to put in parentheses who is supporting them. So is it a paraprofessional? Is it the guidance counselor? Is it someone in the attendance office or the assistant principal? Just define the role of where that student will be so that it's clear to everyone that they are not just wandering the campus. We have brought this up before, but we're going to say it again. We have to define what we mean by a small group. So you're just saying, how many? And when does the student with a disability get a read aloud or a calculator? Not the amount of minutes in assistive technology, but under what conditions, sort of. And when is, one-on-one provided? And if it is written as one-on-one or small group, then those have to be on separate lines. So what we're going to do now is just give you a couple of quick examples of what that might look like. So again, within the condition of a goal, you might put given a 2-step direction and 2 verbal or visual prompts, and then frequent breaks. And in parentheses, we say 3 5-minute breaks per hour, or 15-minute break with counselor, para, or assistant principal for self-regulation coaching, small group in parentheses up to 6, or small group in parentheses 10% of total class size. We have had questions come up about, what do you think a small group is? Like, how do we know what constitutes a small group? And we kind of say, use common sense. Our rule of thumb is a small group usually means a handful, maybe a handful plus 1. So that would mean 5 or 6. When you start saying, big numbers like 15, well, that's pretty much, that could be an entire class or close to it. So, think about what I told someone the other day was, this is my answer. If I say to you that you are going to do a craft with a small group of 3-year-olds, what would you think constitutes a small group? You wouldn't think 15 was a small group. If you are delivering instruction, that group size needs to be reasonably small enough that you can provide some individualized attention within a small group. Now, if you're talking about assessment, obviously that number can be a little bit higher because that's a very different situation. Assessment is a quiet environment. Students are basically on a computer, maybe with some assistance. That's not the same as you instructing the student and there being a back and forth conversation. So you might be able to do a small group of 15 during assessments, during testing, but Definitely not during instruction. Read aloud for passages over one paragraph in all subjects, or read aloud for ELA comprehension tasks only. Calculator for math tasks over 10 problems, or for multiplication and division, or calculator for math computation, or calculator for checking work only. So see how we've put parameters around it. We're not talking about minutes. We're just talking sort of about the conditions of when the student would have that assistive technology, or what the accommodation looks like. That's what we're saying about clarifying and quantifying. And then we already said this, if you are putting one-on-one and small group for specially designed instruction, they have to be separated, each on their own line. The workaround that OEC has shared is that you really don't ever have to say one-on-one. You can say small group up to 4 or a small group up to 5. And if it's one-on-one, the teacher and the student, that's a small group of 2. So you're sort of already covered for one-on-one. Helen, anything you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you covered that very well, Dee Dee. Okay, now we're going to, I think a few people have had to leave. Any questions? First, we're going to ask any questions for the good of the group. And before we stop, before we, while we're still recording. And then if somebody wants to ask a question not being recorded, that's fine too. So any questions out there? Feel free to put it in the chat or unmute. Okay, I know my wait time's not the greatest, but we want to thank everybody and say that our next office hours will be on April 10th. I'm reading it right there at 9 a.m. And we'll look forward to seeing you then. Please send any questions you might have to us in advance if you can, but certainly we'll take questions on the fly. And I know probably before April 10th, not all, but many of you will have spring breaks, and I hope everybody gets a chance to relax and enjoy. And now we will stop recording